Okay, let's begin. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual discussion of the Clark Art Institute's wonderful exhibition, Promenades on Paper, 18th-Century French Drawings from the Bibliothèque nationale de France. This discussion is co-organized by the Clark, the Association of Historians of 19th Century Art, known as ANCA, and the Dehèche Museum of Art. It's part of ANCA and the Dehèche's monthly series of virtual salons, conversations that focus on diverse issues of significance to the study of the art, visual, and material culture of the long 19th century. I'm Michelle Fawa. I'm chairing the series this spring on behalf of ANCA, and I'd like to thank the Dehèche Museum for its ongoing support, as well as ANCA's technical director, Caroline Koch, Will Schmenner, head of public programs at the Clark, who did so much to organize this evening's event, and of course, the participants in tonight's conversation, whom I'll introduce shortly. But before I do that, I want to ask those of you who are not yet members of ANCA to please consider becoming members so that you get announcements about future virtual salons and other interesting ANCA events. And now to this evening's event, which will be a discussion among three of the curators of the exhibition, followed by a Q&A with the audience. Please type your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of them as we have time for. I'm delighted to introduce the three participants in this evening's discussion, Esther Bell, Leonard, and Sarah Grandin. Esther Bell is Deputy Director and Robert and Martha Berman-Lipp Chief Curator at the Clark Art Institute. Prior to joining the Clark, Bell was the curator in charge of European paintings at the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco. Bell has published essays and organized exhibitions on a range of subjects, from 17th century genre painting to 18th century theater to 19th century millinery. Anne Leonard is Manton Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Clark Art Institute. In addition to curating numerous exhibitions of works on paper, she is co-editor of the Routledge Companion to Music and Visual Culture, published in 2014, and author-editor of Arabesque Without End, Across Music and the Arts from Faust to Scheherazade, published in 2022. Sarah Grandin is Clark Getty Paper Project Curatorial Fellow at the Clark Art Institute. She specializes in French works on paper and the material culture of the Ancien Régime. She has published essays on topography, drawing, and savonnerie carpets, and is preparing a monograph on issues of scale in the graphic and decorative arts under Louis XIV. And now I turn things over to the three of you.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. It's a joy to be here. Good evening, everyone. I have been an attendee at many of these virtual salon programs with ANCA, and I've really loved this series. So keep it up, and it's a joy, an honor, and a pleasure to be presenting this evening with my colleagues from the Clark. Now, as you have realized, no doubt from our exhibition title, we've a bit weaseled our way into this evening with our exhibition of 18th century French drawings from the BNF. You've been very generous in welcoming us. And I think if we consider the overlap between a long 18th century and a long 19th century, we have actually a very generous territory to explore. So tonight we will be focusing on objects toward the end of the chronology of the exhibition. But let's face it, the Bibliothèque nationale is a vastly important institution to all those researching all sorts of French topics from all different periods. So we're leaning on that. And actually, we noticed as we were thinking about this evening's presentation that many of the fonds or collections from which the drawings we show in the exhibition were selected entered the BNF in the 19th century. So there's a bit of collection history here that Sarah Grandin will evoke in a few moments, and that may be of interest as well for many of our viewers. I wanted to give the exhibition credits, just to note that Promenades on Paper is co-organized by the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown and the Bibliothèque nationale de France in Paris. It's curated by the three of us here on screen, and also three colleagues from the BNF, three curators from the Département des Estampes et Photographies, and that's Corinne Lobitouzé, Pauline Chounier, and Chloé Perrault. And the exhibition itself was made possible by Jesse and Charles Price. Major funding is provided by Elizabeth M. and Jean-Marie Eveillard, the Getty Foundation through its Paper Project Initiative, and the Samuel H. Kress Foundation. And the exhibition catalog is made possible by Denise Littlefield-Sobel. Now, our exhibition closes in Williamstown on the 12th of March, as you see on the screen, and then it will go on to a French venue, the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Tours, in the summer. So I hope you'll be able to catch it at one or the other place. So just a word about the genesis of the exhibition. Our director at the Clark, Olivier Mellet, and Corinne Lobitouzé, one of our co-curators, both saw good reasons to make the 18th century drawings, French drawings, from the library better known. This is, in a sense, the drawings in the library's collections are hiding in plain sight. They are part of a department of prints and photography. So from the outside, few would ever suspect that there are drawings hidden away, but there are in fact hundreds of thousands of them, which remain little known to even to specialists in the field. So this turned out to be a fantastic opportunity to give these works public international exposure. And so about 2, 3, 4 years ago, we began a process of exploration and discovery that turned up many unexpected examples and little known artists. So this is not a sort of series of the big names of the master draftsmen of the 18th century that one might expect from a more sort of textbook survey, but rather a collection of surprising names. It shows, in fact, the emergence of drawing as a practice that was widespread, that was not at all restricted to academicians or those who are part of the official art world, but was actually a pastime, an occupation enjoyed by amateurs, by many women, and others who did not have a sort of official status. And so this was much of the pleasure of the exhibition planning, was this discovery, sort of unearthing of unexpected works, from which we selected 84 that are on our walls. And as we constructed a sort of a sequence or a logic to the exhibition, we also realized that the theme or the image of the promenade was one that was sort of metaphorically quite on point. There's the experience of walking through the exhibition, which in turn evokes the experience of walking through, sort of experiencing at a sort of everyday level, the texture of life in 18th century France. That's what these drawings, many of which are colorful and which are sort of deeply evocative of places and pastimes and festivals and sort of the activities of many different kinds of people. That's what they evoked. And in turn, the image of the promenade also reflects drawing as a practice, which was often undertaken by mobile walking people, artists who were on the move. They were in the city, they had sketch materials with them and were actually sketching in the act of walking and promenading. So for those two senses, we landed on the title that we did. And I think I will now turn it over to Esther to guide us through the 4 sections of the exhibition.
Thank you, Anne. I'll just say a few words to frame the remainder of our time together, just about how we organized the exhibition, which was through 4 main themes or sections. The first being about drawing practices. And drawing was essential to any academician, a student who would enroll at the Académie Royale de Peinture et de Sculpture. One would have to learn the art of drawing the human figure, which is exemplified in this very gorgeous sheet at left by Jean-Baptiste Greuze. But drawing was also a way of sociability, a way of exchange. It was for all people. It was for amateurs. It was for children. It was for the kings and princesses of France to learn how to draw and to be instructed in the art of draftsmanship. Also for young students traveling through Italy, which is exemplified in the sheet at right by François Boucher. So in this first section, we really tried to tease out all the various forms of drawing practices, which reaches kind of a wide swath of society in this period. The second section is about drawings for prints and the relationships between prints and drawings. Here's another example of a drawing and a print being kind of an exchange of friendship between Hubert Robert on left and his patron, the Abbé de Saint-Non, on right. But in this section, we have drawings that served as models for frontispieces, engraved frontispieces for books, and also the idea of drawing being translated into a medium that could be proliferated throughout society. In the next section, which is one of the larger in the exhibition, we deal with design. And this is a really kind of tantalizing section, if I may, because it records objects and monuments and sites, many of which no longer exist, and some of which are completely imaginative and wonderful. On the left, you see a study for a costume that would have been worn in a theatrical production of this is a Norwegian prince. And on right, you see one of the more wonderful objects. This is a study for a toy carriage. And so you can imagine this drawing being presented to maybe a member of a royal household or of the elite class, a presentation of a potential gift for someone in the household, maybe. But in this section, we also explore visionary architecture, the theater, and you really get a sense of what daily life was like for many from many parts of society in this period. And then in the final section, we tackle drawing as document. And this is also extremely fascinating. You see here on the left an example by Gabriel de Saint-Aubin, one of the stars of the exhibition. Gabriel de Saint-Aubin was an almost obsessive, compulsive draftsman who would wander the streets of Paris and record everything that he saw, from the sales rooms to exhibitions that were popping up on the street, which is exactly what you see on left. This is a scene from the May exhibition where less established artists and women artists would exhibit their works around the time of Corpus Christi Day. And these works are being exhibited on the facade of a building. And you can imagine Gabriel de Saint-Aubin trying to document what he is seeing. And on the right, you see the arrival of Turkish ambassadors, a historic event. In this section of the exhibition, we really experience all kind of a wide range of significant historical moments, from the French Revolution to some very complex colonial exploits to, again, the scene on the left, just a kind of a happy, buzzing moment taking place on the streets. So these are the four sections that kind of frame the exhibition. I think I'll pass it over to Sarah to talk a little bit about the Bibliothèque nationale and its structure and how we found these wonderful works to share with you.
Thank you so much, Esther. I'm so happy to be with you all this evening. And I should preface what I'm saying with the fact that if you want to have a truly deep dive into the subject I'm about to address, I would recommend reading one of the essays in our catalog written by our co-curators, in which they lay out with archivally informed detail every twist and turn of the entry of drawings into the collection of the Bibliothèque nationale de France. But I'm going to give you a very brief cursory overview of the library's history, as well as sort of an explanation of why drawings are found there at all and where one might find them, how one might go about identifying drawings that may or may not be inventoried, that may or may not be listed in the BNF's catalog or searchable on Gallica or the Banque d'Images, other online platforms, how you, as someone who perhaps works on the long 19th century, might yourself go about on a promenade through the rich storage boxes and albums of the Bibliothèque nationale de France. So that's sort of the logic of this section. of our presentation tonight. So as you likely know, the Bibliothèque nationale de France is one of France's oldest cultural institutions that can trace sort of the kernel of its collection to a library, a royal library founded by Charles V in the 14th century. Another key moment in its history was in the 16th century when François I established the dépôt légal, which required the sort of donation of any legally printed book in France to the Royal Library. But the Royal Library really sort of got its footing under Jean-Baptiste Colbert in 1666, when the Bibliothèque Royale was officially founded. And then the print cabinet originates to the year after, 1667, with the purchase of the abbot Michel de Marolles' staggering collection of over 120,000 works on paper, most of which were prints, but many of which were also drawings. And at this point, the Cabinet des Estampes, or the print cabinet, is born. And it begins its tradition of actively collecting prints and drawings. The fact that it collects drawing is perhaps less known, given that it's not in the title. Today, the Département des Estampes et de la Photographie, photography, still does not include the word drawings. But I love this print that actually can be found in the Clark's own collection, produced by a printmaker and the keeper of the print cabinet at the BNF from 1906 to 1925, François Courboin. And he evokes sort of the precious and busy nature of the print cabinet as a site of learning, of expanding one's horizons, and also of sociability. So this is an image to which we like to return when we think about the activity. The print cabinet is a living place where people would go to see the world and expand their visual horizons and train their eyes. Now, as many of you as art historians and research may know, the BNF has undergone over the last decade an intense period of reconstruction, refurbishment. And as of September, we can finally go back to the Cabinet des Estampes, the print room, as well as the reserve and other aspects of this historic Richelieu campus in the heart of Paris. And I would invite you, in addition to searching out manuscripts and rare books and prints, to keep your eyes open, to keep your eyes peeled for drawings. As Anne mentioned, there has been research into 17th century drawings in the collection and to 19th century drawings in the collection. So a little bit of legwork has been done in the 19th century, but I am confident there is still much to discover and to find. I'm not going to sort of mire us too much in the sort of historical happenings of the 19th century and all of the administrative and titular changes that the BNF experienced. But I can tell you that much happened to the collections in the 19th century, especially to drawings, which were moved about departments, moved about libraries and museums in France, and especially in Paris. I mean, the French Revolution, of course, is a vital moment in the enrichment of the BNF's holdings with the seizure of documents, prints, drawings, books from those who had been exiled. But there is also more theoretical conversation about the value of drawings in the 19th century. There are many interesting moments, but one that is particularly interesting to me is that in 1862, the French General Director of Museums threatened to transfer what he called actual works of art and quote unquote master drawings away from the BNF to other museums, arguing that no one would think to look for them in a library. But the curator of the print department, Henri de Laborde, fought to keep them in place, and he refuted any arbitrary divisions between drawings that were, say, purely documentary and those that were works of art in their own right. And the sheets exhibited in our exhibition to some extent reveal the diverse reasons why drawings were produced in the 18th century and preserved thereafter. So I know that I'm thankful that for the sake of our own project, that these drawings were kept in place and protected from the avaricious hands of other museums. All right. So given that one of the greatest challenges of this exhibition was to find the drawings, I thought I would share a little bit about how you might go about finding them. For 18th century French drawings, for example, there are thought to be approximately 15,000 sheets, only about half of which are inventoried. And unlike a drawing that you might find at a museum and a cabinet of graphic arts at a museum, it is very rare that a drawing in the BNF's collection will have its own dossier dedicated to its provenance, bibliography, exhibition history, et cetera. So there's really a lot of material that's rife for new eyes and new research. So the strengths of the collection are very much linked to the purpose of a library, which is to amass a complete and encyclopedic array of knowledge. But at some point in the 19th century, our colleagues at the BNF still don't know exactly when. They think it might have happened during the Second Empire, but by 1895, a cote, or sort of a category called the cote B, had been established, in which curators, when they came across drawings in albums that were sort of organized by subject, they would remove the drawing, and if they could attribute it or identify it, they would throw it into one of these cote B boxes, and the cote B it would still be a good starting place. To this day, they're organized. The boxes are organized by artist name, by school, and by geography. But the organization of cote B is still not digitized, so you have to show up on site to figure out how to navigate it. And I'm just, for the sake of your visual pleasure, including drawings from the exhibition that emerged from the various categories that I'm going to run through. So there are obviously a lot of historical subjects represented in the drawings in our exhibition and throughout the holdings of the Cabinet des Estampes. Upon his death in 1863, Michel Henin bequeathed over 14,000 prints and drawings, which he delivered in large mahogany armoire. And these albums have largely been kept together by the BNF. So the Henin cote will be incredibly rich source of historical iconography and contains both prints and drawings. Another rich collection that entered the BNF in the 19th century is that of the architect Hippolyte Détailleur. The BNF acquired over 4,000 of the drawings that he amassed over the course of the second half of the 19th century. And these are largely topographical views of Paris and of the French provinces, as well as architectural views related to the history of various buildings. And there are also a lot of drawings related to the theater in the Détailleur area of the holdings. The BNF is incredibly rich in subjects of natural history, flora, fauna, insects, anything that you could imagine. And while many of the images that sort of illustrated botanical specimens were transferred to the Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle during the French Revolution in 1793, a lot of things remained, and the BNF still continues to add to those holdings. So if you were to look by type of natural specimen, you would also probably come across many drawings in additions to prints. And finally, the Cote N is dedicated to portraits, and we actually don't have anything from the Cote N in this exhibition, and that's because there are an estimated 350,000 portraits in the Cote N, and there are PDFs online that could help you navigate and identify the sitter. The Cote N is organized by sitter. But there was not sort of an expedient way, especially given the sort of pandemic conditions in which through which we had to work. There was not sort of an expedient way to sort of identify drawings of interest and quality. But this is another area that what I think would be incredibly rich for further research. Another really special area of holding in the print cabinet is drawings by amateur, by non-professional artists. So we have beautiful sheets by everyone from Claude-Henri Vatelet, a professional amateur, to drawings such as this by Louis XV and other royal children, such as Clotilde de France and Louis XVIII. And these holdings were established by the keeper of the print cabinet, Hugues Adrien Joly, in the 18th century. And they contain amazing prints and drawings. And I'd be curious if what one might find in terms of 19th century material in this aspect of the collection. And finally, two other really another really amazing strength of the collection is its architectural drawings. Its drawings related to design. Dessin, of course, in French means both design and drawing. So exploring these images related to design was a real highlight of this curatorial work for us. And the reason why the BNF has such strong holdings in this area is, first of all, it was a destination for students of architecture in the late 18th and throughout the 19th century. The logs of visitors can attest to that. But there were several sort of key moments from which of acquisition and bequeathment from which we benefit, beginning with the acquisition of the Decote architectural drawings, sort of royal architectural drawings, to the acquisition of François-Joseph Bélanger's portfolios. But perhaps of greatest interest is the fact that Etienne Louis Boulet, whose magnificent drawing is visible here, he bequeathed over 100 visionary drawings, incredibly imaginative drawings, to the library in 1793, including this never achieved plan for a refurbishment of the reading room in the Royal Library, to this imagined funerary monument to Newton, to this project for a potential museum, grandiose and monumental in scope. So he donated, again, his drawings in 1793. We have 3 of them in our exhibition. And finally, to conclude my overview of what you might find were you to sort of poke around at the Département des Estampes, Jean-Jacques Lequeux in 1825 donated his massive output of highly meticulous and often incredibly strange drawings. So we have 4 from his hand in this exhibition, including this diagram of anatomical studies for the eye, which would help one learn how to draw eyes, ostensibly, to these uncannily human-like tawny owls, to this sort of imagined shrine for a synagogue, to a shrine for the new religion of theophilanthropy, to the study of workers in Normandy cleaning grain in a sort of proto-Seurat manner, I think. And so that concludes my overview of what you might find were you to embark on your own deep dive into drawings in the Département des Estampes. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Esther, who's going to kick us off for an exploration of some of the more interesting and enticing and complicated late 18th or early 19th century drawings in the exhibition.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. So I'll just say a few words about, and I think we'll share, we'll be very conversant here, but I'll start us out of some of the later works in the exhibition. And this is one of the most spectacular. This is a drawing by Anne-Louise Giraudet, and it actually appears in a sketchbook that's opened to this folio. And Giraudet is a name you probably know, was a student of David, entered that studio in 1784. And in 1789, he would win the Prix de Rome, which would allow him to go to Italy from 1790 to 1795. And as was common practice for a student traveling through the Campagna, he filled his sketchbooks with portraits and landscapes and studies after paintings and etc. And when he died, we know from his Inventaire après décès that he had 27 albums in his inventory, and only 4 exist today, including this one. So it's an incredible treat for us. And here we see a portrait of presumably a friend who's been identified in our publication as Celeste Cotellini, who was an opera singer, and he presumably met her in Rome. And as you can see, she's sketching. She's holding the porte-crayon, and it looks like she's is seated before a mirror, making her own self-portrait. And it's just a wonderful idea of thinking of Giraudet and his friend Celeste Cotellini sitting side by side, one's sketching herself and the other sketching a friend. But again, we've been talking about sociability and friendship and drawing. I think this is a really wonderful example. And the next example, and these are just some other sheets from the album. It's really frustrating not to be able to flip through every single day, but I encourage you to make an appointment at the BNF because this has not been loved enough until now, though it has been digitized, so you can flip through from Gallica at home. And if you'll just go to the next slide, here's a I don't know if I would call this fun, and that's not a guillotine on the right, though many people we walk through ask if that's what it is. But this is an example of a physionotrace and a drawing that would have resulted from a physionotrace. This is by the artist Edmé Quénédet, and it's a portrait of a man, Mathieu Chinec de la Bastide. But a physionotrace was an instrument that would allow an amateur, anyone really, to use the machine to draw the contour of the face, to create a profile. And it was a way to kind of mass produce portraits. It was a way to democratize the production of portraits. And it's very interesting to be able to have a model. The model, it's hard for you to tell on your screen, but the model that we have in our exhibition is actually not a full scale, because you were meant to put your head inside at an angle so the machine could trace the contour of your face. But it's wonderful to have an instrument like this. And we actually have two other optical devices in the exhibition, a zogroscope and a vue d'optique, which I'm not sure we're showing you here today, but are really kind of amazing that they still exist. And Sarah, if you go to the next slide, I'll just say briefly a few words about these two drawings by Jean-Baptiste Hilaire, an artist maybe perhaps lesser known, but these are wonderfully sensitively rendered watercolors with pen and black ink, featuring scenes from the Jardin des Plantes in 1794. And they're from a series of 10 equally finished, highly finished, meticulously finished sheets. And they might seem just bucolic and lovely, a scene of an afternoon in the gardens. But in fact, if you look at the scene on the right, it's hard, of course, to tell from your, oh no, wait, sorry. I'm trying to look as I'm talking to you. Sarah, jump in here, because my big reveal was going to be the Bestie in the background, but I don't see it here. Please, and this is where we become conversant. You're muted, but right there in the background.
Sorry, I was dutifully muted. It's in the drawing on the right, but you can't really see it on this scale. If like you continued down the allée, it's sort of I think to the right of the trees. Do you think so, Anne? Am I?
Yes, it's definitely in the vegetable garden view, and it is just there at the back on the horizon, barely visible, but that seems just to be sort of artfully, nearly hidden, but still an evocation of revolution.
But if
it's the height of the terror during this.
The height of the terror. And you would say if you came to our show and you were looking at it with your face pressed up against the glass, which would be perfectly fine because the drawing would be protected, you could see the trace of the building, and all to say that in 1794 it was the height of the terror, which is barely visible within these very kind of beautifully rendered sheets. And I might pass it to Anne now. I think we'll continue to show a few other examples.
Yeah, thanks, Esther. We can go to the next. So Sarah mentioned the great richness of natural history collections at the library in general. And these are two very, very amazing specimens by Émilie Bougneux. So again, working at the very end of the 19th century during the Revolution, again, her father, as it turns out, had a special role. He was a keeper at the library. And so this meant two things to her advantage, to Emily's advantage. Well, her father was a painter, for one thing. So she did study with him, was trained in art, and you can see her immense facility, these richly detailed studies of, excuse me, of shells and a mineral specimen. What you might wonder is what a Parisian young woman, where she had access to those shells. And in fact, it's thought that the shells are not ones that she was copying from the motif, but rather ones that she saw in the books that her father had access to and brought home to her for her education and enrichment and pleasure. But the subtlety of color that she achieves, that this is in the medium, as you see, is gouache on the very rich material of vellum, which just gives these a sort of preternatural sheen and delicacy. And the other thing to say about the sort of the advantage she had of her father being a keeper at the library was that, of course, when it came time to find a place for her drawings to be, she had the option to present them for acceptance into the library's collection. And it is, it's debatable whether that would have been such an easy trip had her father not ushered them in. But in fact, he did. And so these two are from a group of 10, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a group of 10 that are kept at the library, and we selected these evocative ones. And then just props for amazing research and help from our friends at the Smithsonian, who were able to identify not only the particular kind of mineral this is, but likely the source for it with great geographic precision. So that's some of the fun of doing research. And then just to go on to another.
And can I chime in with one more fun story about this? That is also, this project was so collaborative, and there was so much territory to cover that we're also really thankful for some of our friends in Paris who went to the Archives Nationales when we could not, and got her after death inventory. So we were able to establish Émilie Benoust's life dates for the first time in the history of art, which is pretty satisfying. Exactly. So she was born in 1768, which we can now say firmly.
Which we can say with confidence. Yes. So two major contributions. Read that catalog entry carefully when you get your hands on the book. And then to go on. So here's a real change of pace. Esther spoke about the beautiful portrait by Giraudet in his Roman sketchbook. And in fact, she mentioned that 1789 was his Prix de Rome. It was an eventful year in his life and in the history of France, because, of course, that was the taking of the Bastille, the sort of an inaugural event in the French Revolution. And as it happened, Giraudet, who, as mentioned, was a pupil of Jacques-Louis David, was studying in David's studio, which happened to be just at the foot of the Bastille. So he and others of David's students were direct eyewitnesses to the violent events. And so this is at once a sort of a very immediate eyewitness drawing, and yet this drawing itself is likely a composite. It's based on sketches that he did make from direct observation, but it's a combination of two different days of riots and violence. And you'll see it's really quite shocking and gory. I'd say this is about as gory as we get in the exhibition. And even in this very soft medium of graphite, the evocation of just a terrible physical violence is evident. What he's showing are the heads of those aristocrats who were in the government, or who were otherwise blamed for the ills of France. There's Foulon, there's Berthier. Actually, you see Foulon from two sides. He's the one in the middle and at the right. So two angles with the sort of uncanny sticking out of the mustaches when he's seen from the rear there on the middle top. And the object that you see on the tip of the sword at lower right is in fact the heart of Monsieur Berthier, who I think was intendant des finances. I might get his title wrong, but another person closely associated with the abuses of the government that had led to total economic crisis. And so, again, the fact of Giraudet being able to work in such different registers is something that we can convey in an exhibition of this kind. One thing to note also, just as we go on to the next drawing related to the revolution, is that these were very young men. These were young artists. Giraudet was 20 years old at the time of making that drawing. And this artist with the unforgettable name of Fulcran Jean Arrier was also still, I think, a teenager when he made this drawing. So what he's recording are the events of 9 Thermidor, which the revolutionary calendar name, which translates to July 27th, 1794. The drawing dates from, as you can see, a year or two later. But this is recording the arrest of Robespierre. He's the man in the middle, and it's a composite again of a very complex series of events, but which all did take place in this one dramatic night, where Robespierre, sort of the architect of the terror, is then being he and his supporters are being taken down and will in fact be guillotined the next day, 10 Thermidor. But the marvel of this drawing is that Arrier has combined the scenes of violence against multiple figures with a whole set of revolutionary symbols and references in the space, in the decor. There's that bust that you see on the right wall or against the right sort of pillar is Marat, for example. All this horror condensed in a way that would be still legible to people who had lived through those events, or people like us who come to them much later. Arrier is a very sad story. He also won a Prix de Rome, and he should have gone to Italy, but his travel there was delayed by the revolution. And in fact, he only lived to age 29. So when he eventually got to Rome, he only had a couple of years there and died there as a very young artist. So was never able to sort of flower in the way that many of his peers did. So that there, and these are just two of, I think, 5 drawings related to the revolution that we have in the exhibition, and all are just all are quite different in character, but quite amazing. And Sarah, I think you're going to take us now over to Egypt.
Yes, thank you so much, Anne and Esther. All right, well, we encounter in the following drawings a sort of different form or expression of violence, a much more latent one. I'm going to briefly introduce the project from which the following drawings relate, which are probably familiar. The project is probably familiar to most of you, but in the interest of clarity, in 1798, General Napoleon Bonaparte, of course, attempted to cut off Britain's overland trade route with India by seizing control of Egypt, and accompanying him on his exhibition were over 150 scholars. The French call them savants, most of whom were engineers, whose mission was to document every aspect of Egypt, from its antiquities to its natural wonders to its modern residents. And while the French eventually evacuated in 1801, they left with thousands of drawings, over 800 of which can now be found in the Département des Estampes at the BNF. The drawings entered the collection officially in 1870, but were probably sort of rattling around the library beginning in 1829, at which time the head of the commission and the editor of the Description d'Égypte publication, Jomard, had become head of the Department of Maps at the library. Now, the Description de l'Égypte, that the publication is actually far better known than these drawings, which have really been left out of art historical discourse for reasons that confound me, because they're absolutely fascinating and technically very accomplished. The Description de l'Égypte, we know well, these sort of gargantuan elephant folio 23 volume, this sort of project that used a special machine to engrave this sort of methodical, sort of late Enlightenment illustration of Egypt and all of its riches. This editorial project was, of course, colonial and imperial in its intentions. It was supposed to sort of record eroding pharaonic monuments for posterity. At the same time, it was intended to depict the country's living citizens with an ostensible but highly problematic ethnographic precision, which we'll see in some of the drawings that are on view in our exhibition. So this drawing that I'm showing you now consists of antique fragments that would have been unearthed by members of the expedition. The artist Jean-Marie Joseph Coutel probably sort of illegally made off with these particular fragments. And of course, there are still Egyptian antiquities throughout Europe, and many of them are in the British Museum, including the Rosetta Stone, which has yet to be returned. There are also some sort of really surprising images that emerge from this cache of drawings, including these two portraits rendered in pastel by the artist André Dutertre, who was probably the most sort of confident and accomplished draftsman of the mission. On the left, you have a depiction, a sort of proto-Orientalist illustration of the Emir al-Hajj. And of course, you can see that he's included a lot of sort of exoticizing details, such as the prayer beads and the pipe from which smoke is emerging from the Emir al-Hajj's left hand. To the right is an unusual image. It's a depiction of an Abyssinian cleric who were established. He was one of many Abyssinian clerics who were established in Cairo and in the Nile Valley. And in this case, he sort of refrains from embroidering the image with sort of anecdotal or ornamental detail, and focuses largely on the physiognomy and the skin of the sitter, such that this portrait becomes sort of a specimen of and a taxonomy of racial difference, which is very much a part of the Description de l'Égypte program. And finally, the final image that I'll share from this group of 5 drawings that we selected, of the 800 or more. So really, there's a lot more to explore and to consider in this grouping, is this drawing in pen and black ink and brush and gray wash, again by Dutertre. And we can see in the lower left part of the sheet a European figure in a sort of in a coat or juste corps with a portfolio tucked under his left arm, gazing up at this colossal fragment. And we can imagine him just being sort of in awe of the grandiosity of this massive hunk of stone, but also perhaps pondering his position, his viewpoint, and his charge to record it as part of this Napoleonic mission. So yes, the exhibition, if you visit it, which I really hope you will, begins with the Académie by Greuze, which Esther shared in her overview of the exhibition structure. So we begin with sort of what one might expect to see in an exhibition of 18th century French drawings, the warmth of red and black chalk, and very sort of academic painterly Gallic flesh. And we conclude with this more sort of unusual understanding of drawing's mobilization at the eve of the 19th century. So that concludes our remarks, and I know that we welcome questions and further discussion.
Great. Thank you, Esther and Sarah, for really that truly illuminating and thought-provoking discussion. Let's turn now to some questions from the audience, which I will read aloud, but I also encourage audience members who want to read their own questions, which is more than fine, to simply raise their hand, and I will call on you. I see a few raised hands, and that's, so you're welcome to do either. Post your questions in the Q&A box or raise your hand and then ask your questions directly. So Amy Freund, I see you have a raised hand, so please go ahead.
Okay, I'm unmuting. I assume that I stay without video, which is probably good for all concerned. I'm actually really asking this for a friend. Does the BN have, did you find in your research holdings of technical drawings, like for machines or military fortifications or that kind of material?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yes, and I mean, I think that we, there could actually have been arguments to include them, but when you're looking at thousands and thousands of sheets, we were also thinking about a broader public and the kinds of drawings that would be immediately accessible to a broader public. But you'll find them throughout holdings. I can think of some sewage pipe plans I saw stowed away in the Smithless Sweff boxes. So there's lots to look at.
Amazing. I might direct my friend to you to ask for more details. Thank you.
Helen McCartney also has a question, a hand raised. So please go ahead. No. You're muted. Let's see if I can unmute you, but you might only be able to unmute yourself. So let me give you a minute to sort that out, and I'll jump down to the questions in the Q&A. Anthony Lee is asking, could you show the Abyssinian bishop on full screen again?
Certainly. There.
Great. Anthony, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to just raise your hand or blurt them out, up to you, or if that answered your question, then great. Okay.
Michelle, maybe can I make a shameless plug just because I have it sitting right here
Please
for our catalog, and just all to say that so many of these works have never been published or exhibited before, so the scholarship within the catalog is actually quite new and exciting. Also in the Description de l'Égypte, because the drawings haven't been shown, such as these examples, and so find yourself a copy. Shameless plug.
Good. A quick question from Margie. Could you please state again the online resources you mentioned earlier, Bankimash and others? And I believe that was Sarah who mentioned those, but perhaps I'm wrong.
Yes, so there's the Banque d'Images, and then there's Gallica, Gallica, which has kind of an astonishing number of works digitized, including, I believe, all or almost all of the drawings from the Description de l'Égypte. Similarly, all of the albums and sketchbooks that we've included in the exhibition can be viewed in their entirety, folio by folio, online. And that said, it's not the easiest or most intuitive platform to navigate. So sometimes it's helpful to also look in the BNF's general catalog, which always provides links to works that have been digitized. So usually it helps to use those two resources, or those three resources, in concert.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Let's return to Anthony Lee, who said he tried to raise their hand, but was unable to, but feel free to just vocalize the question that you had about the two images that we're now looking at. If you're able to unmute. Still trouble. Okay, well, we'll continue to hope that Anthony can work out the technical aspects of things. Alice Rowan, go ahead and ask your question. I see you have a hand raised.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm just wondering, are there similar images in the BNF for 19th century drawings? And is there any chance that you'll be doing a similar talk or exhibition on those?
Well, in fact, we took the 18th century in part reflecting interests of the curators involved, but also because there exists a 19th century catalog of, a selection of some of the 19th century French drawings from the library already. And so I guess it exists in an Italian edition, and I think also, Sarah, you
it's
can
dual language. The exhibition oddly took place in Florence in the 90s and was curated by François Fossier, who a curator who has sort of long-standing, abiding interest in drawing. And it's it's Italian text on the left and French on the right. It's called Da David Bonnard.
So you should be able to find that in your nearest art library.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Good. So many other questions. Let's see. Maurice Stook asks, Keats was influenced by the Elgin marbles. Are you conscious of any famous French artists who went to the library and were influenced by these drawings? Thank you.
It's a really interesting question. I don't know that we've looked into that, but one, of course, the registers exist. So, I mean, for instance, we know Degas went to the library and what he consulted. So I think that that would be really interesting to investigate. But Anne and Sarah, do you know anything more about other artists being influenced by this particular material? And I might have misunderstood the question, but was it about the Description de l'Égypte specifically? Anyways, that
I'm not sure about. I mean,
it wasn't specific, just about the Elgin marbles, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the architectural drawings have certainly been a source of learning, but also inspiration for many artists who come after. And again, as Esther said, those roles are preserved, so it's possible to go back and see who was looking, and perhaps even who was looking at what. But that wasn't the focus of our catalog per se. That would be sort of a second layer of research to undertake for someone who was interested. But thanks for the questions.
Yeah, and I'm honestly just repeating myself. That's a really fascinating question. But I think that the library their records seem to indicate that architects especially found the drawings and prints at the library to be a vital resource. That's something of which they have sort of an institutional understanding.
Lots more questions, so we'll get through as many as we have time for. But another question: did drawing extend to the working class or peasants, specifically in consideration of the ability of artist materials, of chalk, of paper, and so on?
I'll just start by saying that it extended to certain sectors of society. As far as affordability of materials, I'm not well informed on that point. I think one thing that emerged very clearly from our research for the exhibition was that drawing was a foundation of education for all who were well born. So in that sense, it was a rather elite occupation, and yet that what we see and what emerges is the appreciation of drawing and the habit of drawing in a much larger sector of society. But how far down, so to speak, that goes, I'm not so sure. I don't know, Sarah, Esther, do you have ideas on that?
I mean, I think it remained. I mean, there's certainly the paper remained a valued and expensive material, and you see that in the way that the rectos and the verstos and every centimeter of a sheet might be employed in various ways throughout the exhibition. But it was very much part of the pedagogy of an educational programs of those in the elite circles. So beginning with royal princes and princesses, and all the way down to sort of members of polite society who had leisure time, who had the privilege of leisure time. But it was also extended, obviously, to artisans and their family members. So it's. But I don't know. How well we could document how much further it extended.
Here's a question, an interesting question about the kind of physicality of the objects in the show. How much do the dimensions vary? To what end? Smaller notebooks, records, other kinds of documentation. Could you talk a little bit about maybe the variety of scale of objects that you included in the exhibition?
I can say a few words about that. It's a wonderful variety of scale and dimension. I mean, you have the Girodet album, which is can fit into your hands. We have large scale, monumental architectural drawings, and so it's really a scale, and that's something we were intentional about, just to have kind of a variety of experience. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to add anything, but I think the scale can be surprising as you're turning a corner. Sheets pasted together, pieces of paper that have flaps, which we're not lifting up and down, but paper that's being used in very different ways.
We have drawings that are as small as the size of an index card, such as the Exposition de Mai by Saint-Aubin on vellum that Esther showed at the beginning. I did see in the comments somebody asked about how large the Abyssinian bishop is. It's about 6 by 8 inches, more or less, so it's quite small in size. And then we have incredibly large multi-sheet drawings that I believe one of the participants in our study day yesterday, that someone, a contemporary of Etienne Louis Boulet, who saw his these drawings glazed, called them paintings. She called them tableaux. So that gives you a sense of how massive some of them are. Some of them could not be framed with glass. They had to be framed with optium, which is a special kind of plexiglass. That's how big they were.
And some are so big that, right, I mean, the paper, well, Michelle, you're the paper expert, but but I mean, the paper made at that time was not big enough to produce a sheet that is the size of the drawing. So there are many, I mean, not many, there are at least 2 examples I'm thinking of that are extremely large, with joined together with multiple sheets.
Thank you. Anthony Lee, I think, has his hand up and is able to ask his question himself. So, Anthony, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation. I really enjoyed learning about these prints, and some of them were particularly staggering, such as the one on the Thermidor 9th and 10th. But I'm actually kind of asking this for a friend, Wendy Belcher, who teaches in the English department at Princeton University. and she has written a book on Abyssinian Johnson, Samuel Johnson, and she has a real keen focus on Ethiopia and Eritrea, going back to the Abyssinian roots. So I was wondering if you had any other examples of Abyssinian people being portrayed from the Napoleon expedition in your collection or in this exhibition.
This is a very unusual image that this was a very unusual drawing for us to come across, I should say. So while this pastel certainly has its counterpart in the print edition, it's sort of fairly unique to us. That said, there's a huge amount of imagery in the form of prints and drawings in the department that's organized by geography. So there are sort of ethnographic figures, costumes et mœurs, so like studies of costumes and people from various parts of the world that document not so much people, of course, but a historically and culturally specific perception of how certain people from different parts of the world looked. But I think that were your colleague in search of more, she could probably find where to look with the help of someone at the BNF.
Thank you. And that is just a beautiful portrayal of the Abyssinian bishop. Thank you.
So there's another question. Can you describe the process whereby the exhibition's organization came into focus? It's obviously quite a broad question. Did the collections lead you, or was it the other way around?
What a great question.
Special part of doing this exhibition, as Sarah talked about, just the vast quantity of sheets to comb through. And maybe I'll start, we can all chime in with our experience, but I think it was, well, we started on kind of an expedition, a kind of a journey, a promenade through the collection, just to see what we could find, just because it's so unknown. And we always had kind of quality at the top of our minds, and also kind of the wanting to tell the most complex story of this period that we could. And so that being said, I think we tried to cast our net as wide as we could to find the works of art that were the most beautiful, the most interesting, and then tried to tease out the kind of framework that would make most sense. Is that an accurate reflection to my colleagues?
Definitely. I mean, Sarah can speak best to sort of the on the ground combing through, but I would just agree wholeheartedly that we can't underscore enough that we did not know what we would find at the outset. And, you know, it's quite different from setting out on a sort of monographic exhibition where it's clear that, you know, you're looking for all the works by this artist, or we didn't even know what artists would turn up. We didn't know what themes would be strongest. We didn't know, as Esther said, sort of what would be the highest quality works in the best condition. All that was only revealed through, shall we say, extensive and laborious investigation.
Yeah, and then once we sort of visual qualitative factors drove a lot of the preliminary selection, and then you're sort of toggling between looking closely at the drawing and then doing sort of a bit of research about the drawing to understand its function, its purpose, its logic. And then once we had kind of our team or our checklist, then we sort of worked collaboratively together to try and understand how to group them. And that's when sort of the themes and sub-themes emerged. So we started by picking we thought were the most powerful drawings, and then the theme of the promenade and the themes that Esther outlined emerged fairly organically through long collaborative discussion among us.
Great. I think we have maybe time for one more question. And there was one in particular that I wanted to pull out. Let me search. Where is it? Oh, it was about Diderot's Encyclopédie. And did you include any illustrations from that in the exhibition? No.
We didn't.
Yeah, because we were focused exclusively on drawings. I mean, gosh, did we see a lot of really amazing prints that we would have loved to have included were this a prints and drawings exhibition, but we were medium, we were very well behaved. We only included drawings. And if you want to see a preparatory drawing for plates of encyclopedia, I would sort of a sister exhibition to ours, Dare to Know at the Harvard Art Museums. They include a really wonderful drawing, a vignette by, is it by Cochin? I think it's by Cochin.
Yes.
Of a, gosh, I can't remember what trade is being illustrated, but those are actually fairly hard to find, those drawings, and we didn't shake any out in our search, but who knows, maybe they're there.
Speaking of shaking out, I mean, the emphasis in the encyclopédie on sort of how-to and métiers and organization of knowledge. I mean, we do reference that with, I mean, I'm thinking, of course, of the Lequeux drawing you showed, Sarah, the grain sifters, and this interest in like machinery and, you know, new technologies. So it's a sub-theme in our show, but yeah, not directly related, deriving from the encyclopédie.
Yeah. I think that is all we have time for in terms of questions. I want to give an enormous thanks to Esther and Sarah for bringing us behind the scenes of their incredible exhibition and for sharing their work and their ideas with us this evening. The show is open until March 12th, so do visit if you are able to. Please join us for our next salon, one of which is on March 10th on art and the environment, and another one on April 21st on African art. And I also want to announce a major event happening at the Clark, a wonderful public event. Acclaimed furniture designer Jomo Tariko discusses his design process and his relationship to the history of design, including the use of drawings like those by 18th century drawings as seen in this exhibition. Tariko, whose body has recently been acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, synthesizes styles across time and place. His work has even entered the realm of popular culture, with several of his chairs and stools featured in the set design for Marvel's Black Panther: Wakanda Forever movie. His virtual talk is scheduled for February 4th at 2 p.m. Please sign up for it on the Clark's webpage. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. Thank you again to our tremendous speakers, and good night to everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Mm.